Jack Carson walked into the grand lobby of the Celestial Haven, his boots leaving faint smudges on the pristine, polished floor. He was dressed in grease-stained overalls, a worn tool belt hanging from his waist, and a smudge of oil streaked across his forearm. Heads turned as he entered, the elegant alien guests glancing at him with disdain before quickly returning to their conversations. It didn't bother Jack. He was used to the looks. Approaching the front desk, he caught sight of Kirit, the Xylox receptionist. The alien stood tall, his chitinous exoskeleton glinting under the soft, ambient lights of a lobby. His multifaceted eyes narrowed as Jack approached, his mandibles clicking in barely concealed irritation. "Yes," Kirit drawled, his voice dripping with disdain. "Can I help you?" He emphasized the word help as if the mere act of addressing a human sullied his professionalism. Jack gave him an easy smile, ignoring the sharp tone. "Looking for a room. Just got off a long shift, and I need a place to crash." Kirit's mandibles twitched. "A room?" He scanned Jack from head to toe, his gaze lingering on the grease stains and scuffed boots. "Are you sure you're in the right place? The maintenance quarters are located several decks below this station." "Pretty sure," Jack replied, his tone still friendly. "You've got vacancies, right?" Kirit let out a low, buzzing sigh and began tapping at the sleek, holographic console in front of him. "I suppose we do have a room available. Something modest, of course. Wouldn't want to inconvenience our other guests." His voice carried an edge of condescension, each word laced with the assumption that Jack didn't belong here. Jack nodded, pretending not to notice. "Modest works for me. Just need a bed, and some quiet." Kirit made a show of tapping the console with exaggerated precision, clearly stalling. When he finally handed over the access card, he didn't bother to hide his smirk. "Room 1387. Maintenance wing. I'm sure it will be sufficient for someone of your background." Taking the card, Jack inclined his head in a polite nod. "Thanks. Appreciate the help." As Jack walked away, he caught snippets of whispered conversations from nearby guests, their tones a mixture of amusement and pity. He didn't mind. What mattered to him was the way Kirit had handled the interaction. The Xylox's attitude wasn't just unprofessional, it was a symptom of a deeper problem within the hotel's culture. The maintenance wing was a stark contrast to the opulent main floors of the Celestial Haven. Dim lighting, narrow hallways, and the faint hum of machinery gave it a utilitarian feel. Jack unlocked his room and stepped inside, finding a cramped space with a barebones bed and a flickering overhead light. He sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair as he considered the events of the day. This wasn't the first time he'd seen behavior like Kirit's, but seeing it here, in a place he'd built to be a haven for all species, stung. Jack had spent years building the Celestial Haven from the ground up, designing it to be a beacon of hospitality and inclusivity. He'd hired beings from across the galaxy, emphasizing diversity and equality. But clearly, those values hadn't taken root in every corner of his establishment. He leaned back against the wall, his mind working through the situation. Kirit's behavior was unacceptable, but it wasn't just about one receptionist. There was a systemic issue here, and Jack intended to address it. For now, though, he'd gather information. Better to see the problem in action before deciding how to fix it. The next morning, Jack returned to the lobby, blending in among the guests. He watched Kirit interact with other patrons, noting the stark contrast in his demeanor when dealing with aliens of higher social standing. Kirit was all charm and professionalism with the wealthy and well-dressed, his posture straight and his tone deferential. But the moment he encountered anyone who didn't meet his standards, particularly humans, his mask slipped. Jack saw him dismiss a human family with barely concealed irritation, directing them to the waiting area without offering so much as a smile. He overheard a group of alien merchants muttering about the slow service, their complaints met with empty reassurances from Kirit. Throughout the day, Jack kept a low profile, observing the flow of operations and noting the cracks in the system. The staff seemed overworked and underappreciated, their morale visibly low. The management team, led by Orvik, a stern-looking reptilian alien, seemed detached, focused more on maintaining appearances than addressing real issues. By evening, Jack had seen enough to confirm his suspicions. The Celestial Haven had lost its way, and it was time to remind everyone, from the lowest staff member to the highest manager, what the hotel was meant to stand for. But first, he'd have to confront Kirit and the culture of arrogance he represented. Returning to his modest room, Jack sat at the small desk and began drafting a plan. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but with the right approach, he could set things in motion. He thought about the countless humans who had faced prejudice and adversity in the galaxy, their resilience and adaptability driving them to succeed despite the odds. This was just another challenge, Jack told himself. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was rising to the occasion. Jack spent the next morning weaving through the hotel's facilities, his unassuming presence allowing him to observe unnoticed. The Celestial Haven's grandeur was undeniable. Gleaming walls of alien alloys, floating chandeliers that pulsed with soft, bioluminescent light, and serene gardens fed by self-sustaining ecosystems. But beneath the surface, cracks were evident. The staff moved with strained expressions, their steps brisk but weighed down by exhaustion. Conversations between employees were clipped, their tones tinged with frustration. In one corridor, Jack overheard a quiet exchange between a human janitor and a reptilian housekeeper. "Carrot's been impossible lately," the janitor muttered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "He docked my pay last week because he said my uniform wasn't up to standard. I don't know how much more of this I can take." The housekeeper sighed. "He's always been like that with humans. If you complain, Orvuk will just back him up. Best to keep your head down." Jack's jaw tightened. It wasn't just the guests. Kirit's disdain for humans extended to the staff as well. And the fact that management condoned such behavior only deepened the issue. Later, Jack made his way to the main dining area, a sprawling space filled with exotic aromas and hushed conversation. A minor commotion caught his attention, a spill near one of the buffet tables. An alien child had accidentally knocked over a drink, and Jack instinctively stepped forward to help. As he crouched to clean up the mess, Kirit appeared, his mandibles clicking in disapproval. "Is there a problem, sirs?" Kirit's tone was icy, his multifaceted eyes fixed on Jack with thinly veiled contempt. "No problem," Jack replied evenly, holding up the now empty glass. "Just helping out." Kirit's gaze swept the scene, lingering on Jack's work-stained overalls. "How thoughtful. Perhaps you'd like to apply for a permanent position in our janitorial staff. It would certainly be a better fit for your talents." A few nearby guests chuckled, and Kirit straightened, clearly satisfied with the public slight. Jack stood, meeting Kirit's gaze with a calm smile. "Thanks for the suggestion. I'll keep it in mind." Walking away, Jack felt the weight of the moment. Kirit wasn't just arrogant. He was actively fostering a culture of disrespect and divisiveness. That attitude didn't just affect the human staff. It cast a shadow over the entire operation. As Jack continued his quiet inspection, he came across a malfunctioning elevator. Guests stood nearby, grumbling about the inconvenience, while an alien technician fumbled with a repair tool, clearly out of his depth. Jack stepped forward, his experience as a mechanic kicking in. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. The technician hesitated before stepping aside. Jack examined the control panel, diagnosing the issue in moments. With practiced efficiency, he rerouted a damaged circuit, and the elevator hummed back to life. The crowd murmured in approval, and one alien, a distinguished-looking member of a crystalline species, approached Jack. "Impressive work," the alien said, his voice resonant and melodic. "Humans truly have a knack for solving problems with such pragmatism." "Just doing what I can," Jack replied modestly. As the guests dispersed, Jack caught Kirit watching from across the lobby. The receptionist's expression was unreadable, but his mandibles clicked in a way Jack had come to associate with irritation. By evening, the tension between them reached a new high. Kirit approached Jack near the staff entrance, his tone clipped and authoritative. "I've noticed you've been wandering around quite a bit. Perhaps you should focus on your assigned room rather than loitering where you don't belong." Jack raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware guests had restrictions on where they could go." Kirit's mandibles twitched. This isn't a hostile human. If you can't respect the decorum of this establishment, perhaps you should consider finding accommodations more suited to your kind. For a moment, silence hung between them. Jack could feel the eyes of nearby staff and guests, their attention drawn to the confrontation. He smiled, calm and collected. "I'll take that under advisement. Thanks for your concern." As Kirit stormed off, Jack stood rooted in place, his mind racing. The Xylox's behavior wasn't just a personal failing, it was emblematic of a systemic issue that had gone unchecked for far too long. Kirit's arrogance, Orvik's negligence, the staff's low morale, all of it pointed to a culture that had lost sight of the values Jack had envisioned when he founded the hotel. That night, back in his small room, Jack reviewed everything he'd observed. He thought about the janitor who feared speaking up, the technician struggling with a simple repair, and the human guests dismissed without a second thought. The pieces were coming together, and Jack knew one thing for certain. Change wasn't just necessary, it was long overdue. The following morning, the Celestial Haven bustled with an air of nervous anticipation. An important alien delegation, representatives of the prestigious Crystar Consortium, was due to arrive, and staff scurried about, ensuring everything appeared flawless. Jack watched from a quiet corner of the lobby, observing how the stress amplified Kirit's already abrasive demeanor. Kirit stood behind the front desk, issuing sharp orders to the staff. "The lighting in the grand hall needs adjusting. It's too dim. And where is the refreshment team? If those trays aren't ready by the time the delegation arrives, someone will regret it." His mandibles clicked irritably as he scanned the room, missing no detail that could be criticized. The delegation arrived in a procession of elegance. Their crystalline bodies refracted light into dazzling spectrums, drawing every eye in the room. Kirit immediately straightened, his demeanor shifting to one of exaggerated politeness. He greeted the Crystar representatives with flowery compliments, bowing slightly with each word. As the delegation approached the reception desk, an issue arose. Their accommodations, supposedly the finest suites in the hotel, had been double-booked due to a scheduling error. The Crystars exchanged glances, their shimmering forms betraying subtle irritation. Kirit, caught off guard, stammered through an apology, fumbling with the holographic console as he tried to resolve the error. Jack decided it was time to intervene. He stepped forward casually, addressing the delegation directly. "If I may, I believe I can help sort this out." Kirit froze, his multifaceted eyes darting toward Jack. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "This is far beyond your—" "I've got this." Jack cut him off with an easy smile, his calm confidence silencing the Xylox. He turned back to the delegation, his tone warm and professional. "My apologies for the inconvenience. If you'd allow me, I can ensure your stay is nothing short of exceptional." The Crystars regarded Jack curiously, their refracted hues shifting slightly. "And who might you be?" one of them asked, their voice like the chime of delicate glass. Jack extended a hand. "Jack Carson, owner of the Celestial Haven." The room fell into stunned silence. Kirit's mandibles hung open in shock, and several staff members paused mid-task to glance at Jack with wide eyes. The Crystars, however, seemed unfazed, their expressions softening with recognition. "Ah, Mr. Carson," one of them said, their tone brightening. "We've heard much about your establishment. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "The pleasure's mine," Jack replied, shaking the delegate's crystalline hand. He turned to Kirit, who was still frozen behind the desk. "Kirit, would you kindly ensure the delegation's luggage is taken to the penthouse suites? I'll personally oversee the rest of their arrangements." Kirit blinked rapidly, his mandibles clicking in confusion. Of course," he stammered, scrambling to comply. Jack's composed demeanor didn't waver as he addressed the room. "Thank you, everyone, for your hard work. Let's ensure our guests experience the very best the Celestial Haven has to offer." As the delegation was escorted to their suites, Jack turned his attention back to Kirit. "A word in private," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. In the relative quiet of a side corridor, Jack faced the Xylox receptionist. "You've made it abundantly clear how you feel about humans," he began, his voice steady but firm. But let me remind you of something. This hotel was built to welcome beings from every corner of the galaxy, regardless of their background. Your behavior doesn't just reflect poorly on you, it undermines everything this place is supposed to stand for. Kirit opened his mandibles to protest, but Jack held up a hand. Don't bother denying it. I've seen how you treat the staff, the guests, and anyone you deem beneath you. That stops today. I didn't realize. Kirit's voice faltered, the weight of Jack's words sinking in. You didn't realize because you never cared to, Jack replied bluntly. But now you have a choice. Either you adapt to the standards of professionalism and respect this hotel demands, or you find employment elsewhere. It's that simple. For a moment, Kirit said nothing, his multifaceted eyes reflecting a mix of anger, shame, and uncertainty. Finally, he gave a reluctant nod. Understood. Good, Jack said, his tone softening slightly. Everyone deserves a chance to improve. Don't waste yours. With that, Jack walked away, leaving Kirit to wrestle with his thoughts. Jack's stride was purposeful as he made his way back to the lobby, his mind already turning to the larger issues that needed addressing. The hotel was his, and it was time to remind everyone, staff and guests alike, what the Celestial Haven truly represented. Word spread quickly through the Celestial Haven. The revelation that the unassuming mechanic in grease-stained overalls was, in fact, the owner of the hotel sent ripples of disbelief through staff and guests alike. By mid-afternoon, the atmosphere had shifted. Workers moved with a renewed sense of urgency, unsure whether Jack was still observing them. Conversations between employees carried a mix of excitement and apprehension, and even the guests seemed more subdued, curious about the man who had built this grand establishment. Jack spent the day meeting with department heads, his focus on uncovering the root causes of the issues he'd observed. Orvuk, the head manager, sat stiffly in the meeting room, his scaled features betraying irritation as Jack questioned him. Low morale among the staff isn't just a coincidence, Jack said, his voice calm but firm. It starts at the top. If management doesn't foster an environment of respect and collaboration, that attitude trickles down. Orvuk shifted uncomfortably. With all due respect, Mr. Carson, the staff knows their roles. We've maintained operational efficiency. Efficiency at the cost of integrity, Jack interrupted. Kirit's behavior alone proves that's not enough. Tell me, Orvuk, when was the last time you held a staff-wide meeting to hear their concerns? Or made an effort to address disparities between how different species are treated? Orvuk hesitated, his scaled brow furrowing. I can't recall the exact timing. That's what I thought, Jack said, leaning back in his chair. Effective leadership isn't about barking orders from an office. It's about being present, listening, and acting. From now on, I expect you to lead by example. Or I'll find someone who will. By the time the meeting ended, Orvuk left looking chastened, his pride dented, but his resolve seemingly strengthened. Jack took no pleasure in the confrontation, but it was necessary. Leadership was about accountability, and that started with setting the tone from the top. As the evening approached, Jack called for an all-staff assembly in the Grand Hall. Employees from every department gathered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and trepidation. Jack stood before them, his posture relaxed but his presence commanding. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice carrying through the room. Some of you already know me, many of you don't. My name is Jack Carson, and I built the Celestial Haven with one goal, to create a place where beings from across the galaxy could feel welcome, valued, and respected. He paused, letting his words settle. But somewhere along the way, we've lost sight of that vision. I've seen staff treated unfairly, guests dismissed based on appearances, and a culture that prioritizes profit over people. That ends now. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Jack raised a hand for silence. This isn't about pointing fingers. It's about recognizing that we can do better, must do better. From this moment forward, respect and equality will be at the heart of everything we do. Every guest, every employee, every being who steps foot in this hotel deserves to be treated with dignity. Jack turned his gaze to Kirit, who stood near the back of the room. The Xylox shifted uncomfortably, but held Jack's gaze. That includes holding ourselves accountable when we fall short. Change won't happen overnight, but it starts with each of us. The room fell silent, the weight of Jack's words hanging heavy in the air. Slowly, a human janitor stepped forward, his expression cautious but hopeful. "Mr. Carson, does this mean our concerns will finally be heard?" Jack nodded. "Not just heard, acted upon. Effective immediately, I'll be implementing a feedback system for all staff. Anonymous or not, your voices will have a direct line to me and senior management. If you see something wrong, speak up. Together, we'll fix it." A ripple of approval spread through the crowd, the tension easing as employees exchanged hopeful glances. Jack continued, outlining specific steps he would take to improve working conditions, address disparities, and foster a more inclusive environment. By the time he finished, the room buzzed with a newfound energy, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. As the staff dispersed, Kierat lingered near the edge of the room. Jack approached him, his expression neutral but expectant. "I'm sorry," Kierat said after a moment, his mandibles clicking softly, "for how I've behaved. You're right, I need to change." Jack studied him for a moment before nodding. "Acknowledging the problem is the first step. Now prove it, with actions, not words." Kierat inclined his head, a gesture of reluctant respect. Jack watched him go, feeling a faint spark of optimism. Change wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. That night, Jack returned to his modest room, choosing to stay among the maintenance quarters as a reminder of where he'd started. The Celestial Haven still had flaws to address, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt confident it could become the beacon of hope he'd always envisioned.